This is all so political. The Wall Street Journal was probably the worst offender. As soon as the tariffs were announced on Liberation Day and the market tanked, they ran stories, you remember, recession, Trump's ruined his 100 days, administration in chaos. When you looked at the actual data that was released in March and April, corporate profits up, energy costs down, GDP going to be recalibrated and good, inflation pretty moderate, job growth 100,000 more than we thought. So all the indicators were exactly opposite of what Wall Street was saying. So what was all that hysteria about? It was all about that 7% that was paranoid about their mega profits.
Joining me today is Victor Davis Hanson, a classicist, military historian, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and author of 24 books, including most recently, The End of Everything. In this interview, we dive into the dimensions of what he describes as Trump's counter-revolution in the foreign policy space. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Victor Davis Hanson, so good to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's talk about the tariff regime in general. What do you make of this whole tariff implementation? What is Trump trying to do with that?
Well, I think he's 90% correct in what he's doing. Where he errs is he feels that because he has a whole agenda and DOGE is not going to cut the amount of money that is necessary to make up for these, tax breaks on tips, tax breaks on Social Security, tax breaks on first responders, maybe tax breaks, that he's going to be in red ink. And so he feels that the revenue from the tariffs, which is about 2% of the $5 trillion of federal revenue. And even if he were to get, as he says, a trillion dollars over a decade, you're still talking about only $100 billion out of $5 trillion revenue. So that's a mistake to talk about these tariffs as a way to raise money. The better way to talk about it is that we are running a about $1.2 trillion deficit we have for 50 years. And in some cases, that is allowing our enemies to get a lot of foreign exchange like China, and they are investing it not in their people, healthcare, housing, etc., but in rapidly building this huge Navy, huge Army, and huge Air Force. So he's right about that, and they cheat. The other problem is that he's trying to tell our allies that the post-war order is now ossified. And the post-war order was because we emerged from World War II, the dominant power with the least amount of damage and a world that needed industrial goods. For basically 80 years, we were willing to be asymmetrical with what became the EU, with Asia, Japan, South Korea. And the problem is that these deficits were tied to offshoring, outsourcing, and a diminished assembly and factory sector. So what Trump is trying to say is we've got to get DOGE / government. We've got to get a trade balance. We've got to address the debt, because without any fiscal reform, we're going to be weak abroad. And it's all part of a larger package of financial reform. All of these issues were predicated on the idea of past administrations. This is Canada. This is our friend. This is our ally. We don't, just like Britain or Australia, we just don't talk about these things. Trump comes in and says, that was then, this is now. We're $37 trillion in debt. We're sliding as a world power in the estimation of our enemies. China's on the right. We've got to make some corrections, and those corrections are very painful for everybody involved.
Do you agree with me? Like, for me, when I looked at those initial tariff tables and kind of the first foray, if you will, in Trump's art of the deal using tariffs, that China was really the focus, and does it continue to be that way given this 90-day kind of reprieve that they're now trying to extend, I might add?
Yes, China was the focus, but he understood there were problems in focusing on China, because while the Europeans run a similar $1 trillion deficit with China, they make it up in part by having a $300 billion surplus with us. And so the Europeans were very opportunistic. For example, when China initially said we're going to cancel all 737 purchases, well, Europe was delighted because they were going to sell them Airbuses. So the Europeans are the last people to engage with Trump. So he's going to get a deal with India. He's going to get a deal with the UK as he did. He'll get a deal with South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. But I think it'll be harder actually to get a deal with the Europeans than it will be the Chinese. And the problem with the Chinese is that not just that the Americans are hooked on cheap stuff coming from China, there's other issues involved, and they are patent and copyright violations, monetary manipulation, dumping product, technological theft. 300,000 students in the United States, maybe 1 or 2, 3 or 4,000 actively engaged in espionage. Stanford Review just had a big story where I work that students are actively engaged in Chinese espionage. So how you address all of that at a time when China is becoming militarily closer to be, it's not yet achieved it, but it's going to aim to achieve military parity with the United States within 5 to 10 years. And it's bellicose, and we depend on it. It depends on us more. We found that out when they kind of caved, but it's a very tricky thing to do. The other thing about it very quickly is this is all so political. The Wall Street Journal was probably the worst offender. As soon as the tariffs were announced on Liberation Day and the market tanked, they ran stories, as you remember, in the news and the op-eds. Recession, Trump's ruined his 100 days, administration in chaos, administration in free fall, tourism down. And then when you looked at the actual data that was released in March and April, corporate profits up, energy costs down, GDP going to be recalibrated and good, inflation pretty moderate, 2.3 I think in April, job growth 100,000 more than we thought. So all the indicators were exactly opposite of what Wall Street was saying. And then when you looked at what Wall Street had been telling us, whether it was Jason Furman under the Obama administration or Warren Buffett, they were saying the chief peril is debt. Debt, trade deficits, budget deficits, national debt. And here was the first president that was talking about that. Then you said to yourself, well, why are they doing this? Well, they were doing it because they can't stand him for one reason, but the other is 7% of Americans own 93% of the market capitalization, not the number of stocks, but the value. And 50% have 1% of market capitalization. So what you basically saw was a small group of very, very elite people in the Acela corridor furious because in August, when the market hit 44,000, they were giddy, and now it had gone down to 40. It was all about that 7% that was paranoid about their mega profits. And so a lot of this is class differences, and I think that's why this is so unusual to see a Republican president whose emphases seem to be on the middle class that was a Democratic constituency.
You know, Victor, with respect to this, you said it's going to be easier to make a deal with communist China than it is to with the Europeans. I'm not aware of examples where China honors their side of any deal. I mean, maybe there are some small examples that I'm unaware of, but let's say they make a deal. You know, there's this 90-day reprieve because of initial, conversations. There's been this criticism of the president that he's very transactional. We can talk about that, but can you be even transactional with the CCP?
No, you can't. You can't, and they're like the Iranians. Everything they say is untrue, and they have no intention of honoring it. I think what he's trying to do is draw attention to the fact that when he went head-to-head with the Chinese, despite their suppression of the news, they were under more stress than we were. And that I think that's true. China experts have said there were people in the streets, they were idling factories. and that we could endure that. So I think what he's saying is, I'm going to put them on notice that I can do this again. And for a period, they're going to find that it's in their self-interest to emulate or feign, or at least follow 50% of what they do, or they're going to get slapped again. And that is going to give us a window, and we have to seize the moment. And in that window, I'm going to tour the world and get $10 trillion of foreign investment. And we're going to make our own pharmaceuticals. We're going to make we're not going to outsource technology. We're going to do the AI, the biotech, genetic. We're going to do it all here. And we're going to have all this foreign capital coming here. And by the time it's going to give us a window where we don't just collapse and be completely dependent on China as we were. And I think that's the idea. I don't know if it's going to work. People have said, oh, you don't have enough skilled workers, or your welfare programs are too lucrative. People won't come out and work. You're going to be short labor. These people are lying. In the Middle East, they will not really put the money there. They're just saying this. But I think that was the idea, at least, that he's getting it is a record amount of foreign investment. And the idea is that we're going to produce stuff that we get from the Chinese that's valuable. And I think he doesn't really care about dolls or cheap consumer commodities that they make very cheaply. But he's talking about military parts, AI, very sophisticated technology, chips and things that he wants to be built here, and he wants no more reliance on China.
Victor, one quick sec. We're going to take a break now, and folks, we'll be right back. And we're back with Victor Davis Hanson, author of The End of Everything and senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Well, so with this respect to this criticism that the president is purely transactional in his foreign policy, there is it's very interesting to me that Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State and now also the National Security Advisor, at least for the time being. And, you know, I can think of few people, I can probably count them on my hand, who are as aware were in the U.S. Congress of the Chinese Communist Party threat, and as supportive of, for example, Chinese dissidents of a variety of sorts. So it's very interesting that he has this, you know, now dual top position. It seems to me that there's something more happening here than pure transaction. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
There is, and he tried to, I think he tried to elaborate, or he's trying to elaborate on the criticism that Trump got for his mercantilism in the Gulf. And he's trying to say in his interviews, he's trying to say that we're realists, but we're not, and we are idealists, and the two are not antithetical. And what he's reacting to is, he feels in the George W. Bush administration, in the 8 years of the Obama administration, in the 4 years of the Biden administration, we put human rights and idealism in a Wilsonian sense. And we didn't understand local customs traditions, and we tried to imprint that, sometimes muscularly in Afghanistan and Iraq, sometimes by promoting, as we saw with USAID, transgenderism, gay marriage, all of these cultural menus and traditional in places like Pakistan or the Gulf. And it didn't work. And all it did was open those countries to mercantile arguments from China and illiberal regimes. So this new nexus of North Korea, Iran, Russia, and China capitalized on the anger of our own cultural imperialism. And at the same time, our interventionism to nation build was an utter failure. So what he was saying is, Rubio would say of that, I think, what was the end result of that? But to drive people that had been pro-American and had benefited by slow osmosis to liberalize their societies. And I think even the worst critic of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, or Bahrain, or the Emirates will say they are more liberal societies now than they were 40 years ago. And that's largely due to Western investment and Western influence. And so I think what they're saying is, we take the world as it is, and we're trying to get 51% of the deal, that we're not going to try, we're not going to be, the good isn't going to be the enemy of being perfect. We don't have to be perfect to be good. We're just trying to make sure that these countries that don't agree with our cultural and social values and our humanitarianism, they don't end up in the other orbit of the dark countries, kind of like the Cold War. If Saudi Arabia is run by the Chinese, they'll never evolve. But if it has good relations with us and it's profitable, maybe by osmosis it will. And that's what got people so angry. The final thing in this is, very quickly, Trump is staging a counter-revolution, and it's two-pronged. One of them is to have a foreign policy that's closer to Israel, stops the Iran bomb, controls China, et cetera, jawbones Europe to be more accommodating to different views. But the other, and the more controversial counter-revolution, is they say to themselves, where is the source of power that gave us the open borders and this lunacy of 12 million illegal aliens, including 500,000 criminals? Where is the policy that allowed fentanyl to come in? Where is the policy that allowed our alliances to be asymmetrical? Where did all these come from? Where's boys, biological males and female sports? Where did this DEI come? Where did ESG come? And they came up with an answer. And they said it's endemic and institutional. And part of it is the high levels of the government with USAID, that is these NGOs. Part of it is these foundations that are not really disinterested, the Tides Foundation, the Soros Foundation. Part of it is these academics, these big blue chip universities that bring in Chinese students, overcharge them, bring in people from the Middle East, both countries illiberal without our interests at heart. They gouge us on grants. They charge 40 to 50% overhead. They defy Supreme Court rules. They practice endemic racism and admissions, retentions, graduation ceremonies. So we're going to tell the universities, no more federal money until you stop the anti-Semitism, you stop the surcharges, you stop the reverse racism, you stop the getting money from China and gutter, not reporting it, all of that. Then they looked at the foundations, and this is really happening this week. They're saying that foundations over $5 billion are going to start paying taxes on their interest income because you're just funding one side. And then they're saying to the media, we're going to get rid of NPR and PBS because they're propaganda organs. And then they're looking at USAID, and they're saying these are NGOs, they're not USAID, they're just basically sinecures for left-wing rotating politicians. So they're trying to deal with the root causes, and that's what worries the Democrats and the left, because they've never seen an administration that would dare do that would dare question the source of their power.
Victor, what do you make of, well, let me caveat this. This has been by far the most, pro-Israel administration in memory. I think you might agree with that. There's a reported schism, right? Netanyahu, Trump at the moment. What do you make of that?
It's hard to know. I don't know why he didn't stop with Israel. Where you get the tension is in two sections. The Israelis say, we have emasculated for a year or two Hamas, Hezbollah. We're both working on the Houthis, and we have demonstrated you can go into Iran with impunity and destroy their air defenses. We have a brief window. It's now the time to take out all of these nuclear facilities. They'll lie about it, they'll lie about it, they'll lie about it, but you cannot deal with these people. And the Trump administration is saying to them, we agree, but this is contrary to the MAGA covenant. The MAGA covenant we ran on said no optional Middle East wars, no foreign entanglements, and it's always better to jawbone than to go to war. That's the MAGA. That's the J.D. Vance, Tucker Carlson group. So what Trump is trying to thread the needle. So he's saying to Israel, let's just get 6 or 7 months of negotiation. And the Israelis are saying it's a waste of time. They'll not honor it. They'll never give up this thing. And he said, well, then if they won't give up, we'll negotiate to the point where they have to shut up or put up. And if you're right, And just yesterday, they said they're never going to get it. Then we have a case to be made to our MAGA base. We can say, do you want a nuclear weapon with these people? I mean, I think sometime in the late summer or fall, they're going to conclude that you can't deal with the Iranians. But they made the effort, and that was good public relations. And either we or the Israelis or both are going to take them out. I think that's what will happen. And that's going to be very controversial because Trump is, as we said, a transactional diplomat, and he does not want disruption in the Middle East. He does not want the price of oil to go high. He does not want increased terrorism. The Iranians have tried to kill him in the past, and he thinks, you know what? I can deal with these people. I killed Soleimani. Everybody knew that he was a terrorist. He was responsible for thousands of American deaths during the Iraq War. And Obama didn't do anything. Even George W. Bush was afraid to get rid of him. I got rid of him. And then the Iranians wanted to retaliate and save face. And I said to them, if you could touch one American in Iraq when you retaliate, we're going to take out. And he said he gave them a list. You know, here's your harbors, here's your military. So then the Iranians said, well, we'll notify you in advance. Just keep everybody in your base. And that's what happened. And there's critics of Trump said, well, some Americans had some shell shock, but basically we knew the missiles were coming. We stayed in the base, and then Iran lied and told their people that they sent a barrage into Iraq to make the Yankee imperialists pay for what they did. And that's how Trump is transactional. And there was no war, but the main point was he got rid of Soleimani without having a war. Mm-hmm. I think that's how he operates. But I don't think that that is a solution. He did it with North Korea as well, and then Biden kind of let up on them. But I just think in the case, if you are on record as Rubio and even Vance and Trump are, that they cannot enrich to 90%, and they keep enriching, then there's no other solution. And it's a very tricky operation. Trump, I think the administration is also not convinced that they don't have bombs, and they are at other facilities that have either just recently been discovered or that there's other ones that haven't been discovered. That they keep talking about all of the places that we know about, but given what we know of the theocracy, there's probably a lot of places where they've enriched, and they may have 2 or 3 bombs. And that is also something they're very worried about, that they could send it into Israel. And everybody says, well, Iron Dome will knock them down. Well, the other day that Houthis sent one in, and it almost hit the airport in Tel Aviv. And if that had been an Iranian missile, you know, they sent, I think, 500 total missiles in those 2 separate attacks. And everybody said they knocked down 95% of them, but there were about 7 or 8 missiles that got through. And if one had been nuclear, it would have been catastrophic. So there's a lot of reasons to be very careful, is what I'm saying.
Well, Victor Davis Hanson, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for joining Victor Davis Hanson and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.